Welcome to this installment of I'm a Moron and forgot that it was Sunday, let alone Palm Sunday, and time is a flat circle for me. I have lost all track of days, and just doing the best I can like everyone else. I genuinely it did not click with me that it was Sunday, even though it says Sunday on the little picture that I made. And it definitely didn't click that it was church time. I just made the time based on when I wanted to eat dinner, which is what you're supposed to do when you eat barbecue, is say, hey, here's the time that I want to eat dinner. Here's how long it takes to make whatever dishes that I'm making. And so here's what time I'm going to get started. So here we are. Anyway, today we're going to be making some pulled pork. Pulled pork is super easy to make. If you're just starting off making barbecue, this is the thing you should start with. Pulled pork is super forgiving. Like my pastor, I hope, who will forgive me for making a barbecue video instead of streaming church. But I promise I'll tune in as soon as this is over. Anyway, pulled pork is super easy. I'm going to hand this over to my wife so she can film me. I'm going to turn it around so that it faces, hold on. Oh, here, I'll let you, ready, 1, 2, turn around. There we go. Okay. So pulled pork is super easy. It's super forgiving. We're going to cook it low and slow like we do everything else. I'm going to shoot for about 220 or 250, maybe even 275. You can cook this even lower to 25, which is what a lot of people swear by. I haven't noticed a big difference. So I'm not going to do that because I don't want to spend 12 hours smoking a small pork butt. We're going to try and knock this out in about 8. The way we're going to do that again is cooking a little bit higher at 250, 275, and maybe some folks like, but I like. And then we're going to wrap it because about halfway through, this is going to hit what's called the stall, which is where the meat, I believe, the equilibrium between the moisture loss and the heat coming into it reaches that equilibrium, and then your meat stalls out, and it can stall out for several hours. So what we do to push through that stall is we're going to wrap this in aluminum foil. A lot of folks wrap brisket as well. I do too, and I would use a what would I call it? Butcher paper to do that. But butcher papers can be a little tricky to get a hold of because you got to order it online, and the internet's a little complicated. Butcher paper is great on brisket because it allows for a little bit of a permeable wrap so that you get a little bit of interaction with the outside environment. With aluminum foil, you don't, and so it's going to kind of kill our bark a little bit, but that's okay for what we're doing. But the aluminum foil is going to keep that moisture in there, and it's going to push it right back into the meat and push us through the stall. And so we're also going to cheat at that point, which I'll show you. I don't want to spoil the big surprise, but barbecue purists will probably have me tarred and feathered for it, but I think it makes complete sense because aluminum foil is not a permeable surface, and so there's nothing getting in and out. At that point, you're just turning your grill into an oven. So we're going to use an actual oven and not waste charcoal and wood. As we talked about before, making barbecue is about layering flavors, and so we're going to do that in a handful of ways. We're going to start with salt. Normally I would salt this the night before. I decided not to, just so that we can show you what it looks like. Then we're going to add a layer of an injection, which I've already made, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. And then we're going to put another layer of flavor in the rub that we made yesterday, which we'll talk about again. And then we are going to smoke it, which will give it an additional layer of flavor. And then we're going to pull it when it's done, toss it in the juices that it's already accumulated, and we will also spritz it with the East Carolina mop sauce that we'll make later on. Anyway, let's get started. So this is a bone-in pork butt. The butt does not come from the rear end of the pig. It comes from the shoulder. So this could also be called a shoulder roast, among many other names. You'll find this in your grocery store pretty easily, at least during normal times. This particular one is bone-in. You see right there, you can see the bone. And as you probably already know, a good sign that your pork butt is done is that bone in the middle will slide right out. If this was not bone in, it would be obviously more floppy. That bone gives it some rigidity and holds the muscle together while you're cooking. And so if it didn't have that bone, what we would be doing is getting butcher twine, and I would tie it as close together into a cylinder, square ball, some uniform shape to help it cook more evenly, and also to keep it from falling apart on the grill. But that bone is going to do that for us, so I'm not going to bother tying it up. Some people still would, and you could if you wanted to, because this end does taper off just a little bit, but we're not going to bother with that
Thomas
today.
wants to know where you buy your meat.
Where do I buy my meat? So this meat came from Publix because it's a pandemic, and that's the only place that I can get it. But if I had my choice, my top two choices in Nashville, I would either go, well, three choices. If I'm making brisket, the best place to get your brisket is Costco. They sell prime brisket at an obscenely cheap price. I think it's usually like $2.99 a pound, or $1.99 a pound even, somewhere around there. It's crazy cheap because somewhere like Publix, which has good meat, or commercial or commodity meat, their choice brisket is $9.99 a pound. So I don't know how Costco is doing that, but they are. So I'll go get brisket and pork bellies, like a whole slab of a pork belly if I'm making bacon from Costco. So I like Costco for that. If I'm doing something a little bit more special, like if I'm grilling a nice steak, I like to go to Porter Road Butcher. They work with a lot of local or regionally local farms here in Tennessee and Kentucky, and their meat's really good. I did a barbecue demonstration at a festival in North Carolina last year and used some double cut pork chops they custom cut for me for free, and the meat is just superb. And we said yesterday with barbecue, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you start with great meat, you've already got a leg up on making great barbecue. And then the other place that I like to get meat from is local farms. You'd be surprised by how many local farms are probably in your area, no matter where you are, and that you can order direct from farmers. Now, a lot of that is seasonal because they're obviously not processing their hogs year round, or their cows or whatever. Chickens are more easy to usually come by. But I got my turkeys last year from a local farm that's 30 minutes from my house, and it's called Field of Dreams Farm, and I love the movie, so it was even more fitting. But the turkeys were amazing, and they lived happy lives. They had one bad day on a Saturday, and we ate them on a Thursday, and they were absolutely delicious. So yeah, you kind of get what you can get. So the biggest thing is looking at the label on the meat and making sure that it's not already been injected with a saline solution, which is water and salt, because then you can't really control your salt content because you don't know exactly what is in there, even if it's giving you a percentage of the saline injection. So yeah, I mean, if you can go to like Publix, or Kroger, wherever, you're going to get decent meat. But if you can, go somewhere like, Whole Foods or a fresh market. Again, if you've got a local butcher, those are usually even better. And then if you can get a farm, or you can order meat, really high-end quality meat from websites like SnakeRiverFarms.com and D'Artagnan.com. And they can get you access to heritage breed pork. Heritage breed pork is what Porter Road Butcher sells, and what you would probably get at a local farm. This is called commodity pork that we're working with today. You can see the muscles are a little bit lighter. Commodity pork is what's just made in huge farms and is sold at the grocery store. And it's bred for its size because they wanted to make as much money as they can off of each hog. And so they're not quite as flavorful. They're not quite as fatty. They're just not quite as delicious as a heritage breed. And so by heritage breed, I mean breeds of hogs like a Berkshire hog or a Duroc hog. There's several others that are coming onto the scene again as well. But this is just a commodity pork, so it's going to be good, but not life-changing. But we're working with what we have. So anyway, we're going to layer our flavors. The first thing we're going to do, now normally we would first salt the meat 24 hours ahead of time, but we didn't do that because I want to show you kind of how to salt it. But we're not going to put our rub on first because we're going to do an injection first. And the reason we do injection first is, one, we're building flavor, so we're going to get that injection down into the meat. But also, if you put your rub on and then your injection, that injection is going to come out and smear or flood all of your rub off. So we're going to use this injection. This injection is made by a guy named Chris Lilly. He's a pitmaster, a very famous one, at a place called Big Bob Gibson's in Alabama. If you've ever heard of Alabama white sauce, it was created at Big Bob Gibson's. Chris Lilly did not create it, Big Bob did, but Chris married Big Bob's granddaughter, and now he is the pitmaster there and has really brought that place to national prominence. He's also on the competitive circuit, and so he competes in a lot of barbecue contests around the country, and I think around the world. He's a spokesman for Kingsford. Anyway, he's amazing, and he shares his recipes, and because he wins a whole lot. So we've got an injection of his today. This is a pork injection that is made with applesauce, water, salt, sugar, and Worcestershire sauce. So we're going to get, again, looking for that balance of flavors. You're getting sweet and savory in there with the water. You're adding some moisture. And then this has salt. Now, if I were to salt my pork the night before, I would leave the salt out of this injection. But because I didn't, I leave the salt in the injection so I can get that salt deeper, because obviously the salt's not going to get in there.
Apple juice or applesauce?
What did I say? Applesauce? I'm in a pandemic and I can't remember things. It's apple juice.
I just wanted them not to.
Sorry, yeah, that would be very weird. It is not applesauce. So anyway, so we've got this, and I've got it in a cup for a reason. You could mix this in a bowl, but then you're gonna have to tilt the bowl and hold the bowl in really weird ways and probably spill it to get enough fluid to be able to put this needle down. This needle is not super fancy. It's not as nice as the one that I normally have. It only has holes down here at the bottom instead of up and down. But this needle was $1 and it was at Walmart. And my good needle is not working great. So we're gonna try this one and see if it works. So we're gonna put the needle down here. We've got kind of a tube for our injection so that hopefully it just comes right up. Let's see. Look at that. Magic. So again, just like we injected our turkey last week, if you joined us, we're gonna do this at about 1 inch intervals, and we're gonna do it nice and slow. We're gonna push it in as deep as we can, push slowly, pull out slowly, pushing as you go. And we're gonna do kind of a grid pattern all the way around this. It may not look like I'm pushing a lot, but I'm pushing it enough. If you push too hard, come out too fast, you're gonna have an Old Faithful situation, and you're gonna shoot your wife in the face with pork injection, and she'll get a coli and divorce you, and life will not be good.
And then where goes your sugar mama?
And there goes my sugar mama, exactly. She said that, not me. We're going all the way down. You can feel the bone hit when you do this. You can probably see that hard jerk at the end. That's the bone. We're just going all over. There's not, magic to this. The point is just to get the juice in everywhere you can. And we're gonna go from all sides on this. We can go deeper on this side because we're missing the bone. Until we get up here. There's the bone. There's the bone. And we're out of injection, so we're gonna get some more. I like wearing gloves because it keeps my hands nice and clean, especially with the rub. It's gonna get super messy here in a minute. And it keeps me from having the coronavirus in case this pig was eating. No, I'm just making up things now. Because it takes a minute to do this. If you guys have any questions, as always, just ask them along the way. Kim's our everything producer today, and she's really good about sharing those questions. We're gonna hit all sides of this with our pork injection. Now, if you go and Google Chris Lilly's pork injection on the internet, as you should, you're gonna wanna cut his recipe in half. He is using a 16-pound whole shoulder for his recipe, and this is a pork butt, so a part of the shoulder, and it is only about 4 or 5 pounds. One interesting thing about cook time to know is that you're not looking, if you're trying to figure out the cook time, you're not so much looking at, I think we got that top already, we got the side. Let's do this one and we should be done. When you're trying to calculate cooking time, the thickness of your meat matters a lot more than the actual weight of it. To understand a little bit more, check out AmazingRibs.com. They've got all the science behind that. This is the fat cap on top. We're gonna put this on top. Some of this fat's gonna render, some of it will not. It will give a little bit of moisture to the pork, but if there was a thicker coat of fat on top, like let's say it's a big fat cap like you get, sometimes you even get skin on these things, we would trim that off. A lot of times I would completely trim this off because that fat is not giving flavor to the inside of the meat. This is extramuscular fat. That is intramuscular fat. Intramuscular fat is the marbling that you always think about, especially with steaks. It's what gives flavor. This does not. This just keeps our rub and our salt from penetrating the meat. So you want to get most of this off as you can. This one's already in pretty good trimmed up shape. So we're going to hit it with some salt. This is kosher salt. We're going to use about a half a teaspoon a pound of meat. Again, with the salt, you cannot switch out kosher salt and table salt 1 for 1. Google how much you need to scale back that table salt because it's smaller. Also, if you'll notice, we're using one of these fancy aluminum pans that I picked up at Costco. I love these things because, again, I can make a huge mess in them and there's not cleanup. When I sprinkle my salt, I like to keep it nice and high. It lets it come down like rain, and I can do this nice and evenly. Ooh, we're gonna do an up close picture. So we're gonna do this just nice, really thin, even coat, much like you would just salt a steak. This doesn't need to be super heavy, but if you do it super light, it's not going to do any good. So don't be afraid of the salt. It may look super salty, but again, this is kosher salt. So the flakes of the salt are super thick and are not as salty as if you put this much table salt on there. So we got our second layer of flavor. First layer of flavor was that injection. Second layer of flavor is the salt, which is going to help tenderize and give some more flavor. Third is our rub. We made our rub yesterday, so if you missed it and want to get the secrets to my success, I mean just my home cooking. This is the rub I use. It's a riff off of a rub called Memphis Dust on Amazon, on AmazingRibs.com. But I changed it up, added a few things, took a few things away. It's equal parts dark brown sugar, which has a little extra molasses, white sugar that has no molasses. There's a good hunk of paprika in there. We've got garlic powder, black pepper, onion powder, celery seed, chili powder, and rosemary. So we're looking for a balance of savory and sweet, some a little bit of herbaceousness as a back note with those celery and rosemary flavors. And then if you notice, there's no salt in this. I like to keep my salt and my rub separately so I can control how much salt is in something. So if you were going to do this with a commercial rub, you would want to do the injection, but you would not want to salt separately, because your commercial rub that you get at the grocery store is going to have salt in it and a lot of salt in it. So you don't want to salt this, and you're going to have double salt, and it's going to be not great. Again, just like with the, I'm going to turn this over because we're going to want this part on top. And I'm going to put this for a second, and I'm going to pour out some of that juice just so that we don't smear too much. We're going to take our rub, we're going to hold it nice and high so that it falls down like rain, nice and evenly. Now if you see all these big chunks, this is the brown sugar that's clumped together that I did not get a chance yesterday to grind. We're going to do a nice thick coat all over this. As you can see and probably hear, that brown sugar is falling, but it's not falling on my table or countertop. It's falling straight into this bin, which is collecting all of it and making for a nice, neat, easy cleanup. Once we get a nice thick coat of rub on one side, we're gonna pat it down so it stays in place, and also so that it gets moist. Now, if you notice, we did not do a oil lather on this, and the reason for that is because all that oil lather is doing is working as an adhesive to hold on our rub, or hold our rub onto the meat. But the injection is already doing that, so we don't really need that extra second layer. I want a nice thick layer. It's going to help build our crust, which is called bark. That's that really dark outer layer that we like so much in barbecue. Now I'll show you one thing that I just noticed now. This is coming apart down here a little bit. You want to be really careful, and this is why you would tie it up, because if you were to just pour, you're saying, hey look, there's some open spot, I should dump some rub in there. It's going to get tucked in here, it's not going to get cooked, and it's going to be gross when you bite into it. So normally I would tie this up just to keep this little flap and this little flap over here that's falling off. But instead we're just going to cut this flap over here because it's not going to cook. And I'm going to do the same with this flap, which is very, very painful, and I hate doing that, but it's not going to cook either. It's going to, I mean, it will cook, but it will just turn into pork jerky. So let's go ahead and just cover this in some seasoning. There we go. We got one more side over here to do. And again, you want to go kind of heavy on this. You're going to lose some of the seasoning to the bottom of your pan and to your gloves and to things like that. But you also got to keep in mind that with pulled pork, you're going to pull this apart, as the name implies, and you're going to mix it all together. So the vast majority of the pork that you're going to be eating is the pork inside this. So you're not going to have these big, bold bites of rub in your meat. It's all going to be mixed together. So it's okay to go ahead and do a nice, thick outer coating of this. That way it balances out nice and well with the inside that's not going to get hit with this seasoning. That looks pretty good. I'm going to pat this down again, one, to keep the seasoning in place so it doesn't fall off, but also to get it nice and tacky, because as we said yesterday, cold, wet, but especially wet meat, holds on to smoke, and it's going to help develop that smoke ring better than dry meat will, because those water particles on top are going to snag those smoke particles that are going over top and hold on to them for dear life. But if it was dry, it would be like a wind tunnel, and that smoke would just sail right over. Anyway, we've got all of our different flavors. I cheated and went ahead and got the smoker going because I want to get this on the smoker as soon as possible, because pulled pork is a finicky thing. As easy as it is to cook, it could take 8 hours. It could go faster and do 7 hours. It could take a little longer and take 9 hours. When you're doing barbecue, you always want to allow yourself extra time, because you don't want to invite friends over to dinner, well, right now at all. But when we get back to normal, you wouldn't want friends coming over and say, hey, we're going to have pulled pork at 6. And you say, okay, my pulled pork takes 8 hours, so I'm going to 6 clock, work backwards. Okay, I need to start it at 10, and then 6 shows up and your pork is still going. Each muscle that you buy at the store, because that's what these are, is going to act a little differently. The weather outside is going to affect things. The consistency of your smoker is going to affect things. There's all kinds of different factors. You want to build some time in, and there's ways, we'll talk about that later, about how to hold this in place. But again, I love pulled pork because it's easy. Because if you allow yourself that space and time to have a little bit of wiggle room, you're going to make really great pulled pork. Anybody can do this. That's the real secret with barbecue, is that when it comes to backyard barbecue, when you learn the basics, anyone can make really good backyard barbecue. Maybe not great brisket all the time, but with pulled pork, anybody can do this. And it's going to be better than just about any barbecue restaurant you've had, because that barbecue that you're getting in a restaurant, even if it's a great barbecue restaurant, even if it's my favorite barbecue restaurant, the trick with a barbecue restaurant is being able to hold meat for long periods of time and keep it moist and succulent. But a lot of times, especially with pulled pork, as soon as you start pulling it, it dries out. And so by the time that you get to your favorite barbecue restaurant and you get that order of pulled pork, it's already kind of dry. It's got some of that flavor, but it's just not as good, which means that when you serve pulled pork to your friends fresh out of the smoker, you're going to be a hero, because it's easy to make and it's delicious. Let's go outside and put this on the smoker. Now, everybody at home, make sure you cross your fingers, and let's see what time or what temperature we're at. Whoa, 189. That'll give us a little time to work. So this is our smoker. This is my rig. I'll go through this again since I didn't go through it yesterday, plus we need time to get our temperature up. We're looking for, like I said, about 250, and we are below that today. Yesterday it went really fast. Today it's just not going as fast. So again, you just kind of have to work with what the good Lord gives you. This is my rig that I use, that I like a lot, and this is when people ask me, hey, and I get these emails a lot, I'm looking to buy a new smoker, I'm getting one for me, for my wife, for my husband, what should I get, what do you recommend? This is the rig that I recommend that if you were first starting. What we have here is just your basic Weber traditional grill, and it's been put into this table with a little place for all your junk at the bottom. But what I like about this is you get a lot of bang for your buck. This table may seem extraneous, but I really like it because, again, when you're talking and doing videos, you can put your meat down and gesticulate with your hands so that you can actually talk. But really, it comes in huge handy when you're grilling, taking meat off, taking grilled veggies if you do that sort of thing. But this is really a must for me if you're going to be taking smoking any kind of seriously. But really, even with a grill, I like this because you get the table. But then, if you get above the baseline Weber, even without the table, you want to make sure you get this thing at the bottom. This is an ash can, and if you get just your basic Weber, it's just going to be kind of a plate down here at the bottom, and so the ash is going to fall down from the bottom holes where the vents are straight into that plate, and they can blow around and you can burn your house down. I love this because this can catches all of that. It makes for nice, easy cleanup, but it's also safer. Again, this is just a Weber. This, if you got a regular Weber, even with the ash can, you're looking at only about $100. This is about $200 that comes with all of these extra accoutrements, but I think they're worth it. Inside of our smoker, we have a little basket that looks kind of like a big version of this, and it's called a slow and sear. And the slow and sear is essentially a metal basket for charcoal, and it helps turn your grill into a smoker by helping you do indirect cooking. Indirect cooking is what we do for all barbecue. It means that you have your heat source in one place and your meat in the other, and so the heat reaches the meat indirectly. When you grill, you're doing direct heating. But what's cool with the slow and sear is that it allows you to do that wonderful indirect heating for pulled pork, or if you're doing steak, doing what's called a reverse sear, which is where you roast the steak to temperature and sear it at the end, which is how you should be cooking your steaks. But that slow and sear channels all that heat up so you can get a really nice, awesome sear on your steaks. Or if you're having a bigger barbecue, you can just take that thing out completely and you have your entire grill space to work with, which I love. So that's what we have going on here. We've got our Weber kettle, we have a slow and sear, and then you may notice that there is this wire coming out of our out of the top vent, and what that is a thermometer. Now you may be asking yourself, but Zach, isn't there a thermometer right there? There is, and for what it is, it's accurate enough. The problem is, if you'll notice, the thermometer is on the top of the smoker or the grill hood, but we don't cook meat at the top. We cook meat down here.
Right now, there's about a 10-degree difference.
Yeah, we cook meat down here. So as Kim said, there's a difference. So this is measuring heat at the top, but our food is not at the top. Our food is down here, and so we want a temperature read of what our meat is actually cooking at. And so what we have is this little piece. I don't know if you can see that because of all the smoke, but there's a little probe in there that goes right on top of the grill grate with a clip, and it's going to tell us the temperature of our meat. Now I can also get another probe, and you know what? I'm going to do that real quick. Let's go grab. You want to just give? Tell you what. You guys stare at the meat for a second. I'll be right back. All right. We back. Okay, so sorry about that. You're welcome for the free barbecue porn. I've gotten the point with my pulled pork that I've done this enough that I just can rely just on my instant read thermometer. If you don't have an instant read thermometer, why are people flying? If you don't have an instant read thermometer, get one. I highly recommend a company called ThermoWorks. The only place you can buy them is their website, thermoworks.com. The best thing you can do for your cooking period, whether it's grilling meat, making barbecue, or even baking. I used it for a loaf of bread that I made the other night. An instant read thermometer is going to make sure you don't overcook or undercook your meat ever again. Make sure you get a good one. ThermoWorks has a nice, inexpensive one. It's called Thermo Pop. Usually runs about $30. Gives you temperature in about 4 or 5 seconds. It's awesome. But we're going to use this extra probe. What's great about this setup, this is called Smoke. It is a barbecue thermometer from the company called ThermoWorks, and it has 2 different probes that we can use. This top one is measuring our grill grate temperature, and then we're going to put this one in here at the bottom, and it's going to tell us the temperature of the meat so that we know not just when it's done, but when it's time to wrap. And then what's really cool too is you have these alarms that you can set for high and low temperature so that you don't have to keep checking it every 2 seconds, but if it gets below a certain temperature that you don't like, it'll set off the alarm. You can come out here and adjust the vents. Speaking of which, let's talk about that real quick. We have vents down here and we have vents up here. When you're smoking, what you're doing is ultimately just controlling the flow of oxygen into your fire. The reason that this smokes low and slow is that because we've controlled the oxygen and lowered it to such a point that it's not burning and doing full combustion in the charcoal or the wood, it's just smoldering. But to do that, we have to control the flow. So down here, we want to think of as our gas. These are your bigger vents. This is what's really going to suck in all your air, or a lot of your air. At the top, this is more of a brake that we're going to make fine-tuned adjustments for. 9 times out of 10, you want to leave this completely open. If you completely close both vents, that's how you put your fire out. But it's also going to create really acrid taste if you still have meat in there. You obviously can't see the vents because they're covered up by all this metal basket and whatnot. So what I've done when I first installed it, and it's kind of fading now, but I marked off where fully closed is, obviously, but then I marked off where fully open is and where halfway open is. And this gives me a sense of where I need to be. And so with my smoker, and again, this is going to be a little bit different, but pretty similar for everybody's smoker. The reality is you just have to use your equipment and get to know it yourself and make marks yourself. But this is about where I want to be right now to get my temperature up. As you can see, it's already up around 214. I will probably lower it depending on how fast that temperature is rising. But that's really where I'm going to do most of my controlling. Very, very rarely will I use that, although I actually did have to use it yesterday because my temperature kept going up and I had to close it about halfway and it really slowed things down. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and put this probe in since this is a how-to video. There is a little bit of technique with this. You don't want to just stick it down the bottom and walk away for a couple of reasons. You need to make sure you know where the tip of this probe actually is. Because if you were to stick this probe all the way in the meat, the probe would come out the other end. Same way if you go this way. Also, you want to avoid the bone because the bone is going to stay relatively cold or cool relative to the temperature of the meat, and it will throw off your thermometer. So we're going to go in from the side over here. Let's turn this down. We've got our bone that we can feel. It's soft, it bones right there. Let's see, here's our bone. So let's go in on this side.
This is being referred to as barbecue church.
Barbecue church. Amen. Praise the Lord. We're going to go right in the side. What I like to do is hold the thermometer above the top, figure out where the middle of the meat is relative to the thermometer, so it's about right there, and then I put my thumb on the thermometer. Then I go in through the side, push the thermometer in till my thumb touches the meat, and that tells me I'm right in the dead center. Again, making sure that you don't touch or even really get near, if you can help it, the bones, because that will throw off your temperature and you'll end up overcooking your meat. So we're just about at temperature, and like we said before, you could cook at this temperature and at 225 is what a lot of people like to do. We're doing 250. We may even crank it up to 275 just to knock this out. But in the meantime, our rub has turned more into a lather, which is great because that tackiness is going to hold on to all the smoke and give you that flavor that you're looking for. So what we're going to do now is have my beautiful assistant hold up the top of the grill, because when you do, we talked yesterday about how if you're looking, you ain't cooking, and that's true to a point, but you do need to monitor your meat. But when you do, if you take this top up and just flip it over to the side and put it in its holder, all that heat that's collected up at the top of the dome is going to escape, and you're going to start off from square one again. Also, when you open this, you're flooding the cooking chamber with oxygen. Oxygen creates fire. It's going to cook up. It's going to boost up those charcoals real fast. So you want to make this a pretty quick process when you're working on a Weber. The reason the guys on those big, huge black offset smokers can open that and take it up, take their time, is because their firebox is separate. They're not opening up their firebox, so they're not really adjusting the wood itself. So first thing we're doing, I'm going to have Kim hold this up with one hand. And I'm going to give my beautiful assistant a glove so that she doesn't burn her hand and divorce me. We're using hickory wood again, and if you'll notice...
Hold on.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
I can't...
But you don't have to, you can just use it as like an oven mitt. That's what I am
Too
doing.
late.
We're using hickory, and if you'll notice, I'm using the same hickory that we used yesterday. Partly because I'm just frugal like that, but also it just seems like a waste of wood. If you'll notice, that part charred and smoldered, but this barely got touched. And so there's no point in tossing this chunk of wood if you're just making barbecue at home. If you have a big chunk of wood like this that's not really been burned that much from barbecue, reuse it. I actually will reuse charcoals. If I'm doing like something quick on the grill and I've got this big bed of charcoals and I grill and then I smother the fire, put it out, a lot of times I'll have like half the charcoals that have not even been used. So what I'll do is I'll knock all the ash away, sift out the like unused charcoals, put them back in there if I'm going to use it for grilling. I would not do that for barbecue. When it comes to barbecue, you want to be at baseline. You want unburned charcoals. You want to know exactly where you're starting from. But if I'm going to be grilling something, all I'm concentrating on there is heat. And so if you still have unused charcoals from the night before, reuse them. They're not going to change the flavor, do anything other than save you money from using wasted charcoals. So we're going to reuse this. And Kim, if you would lift that up for me, just straight up. You probably won't be able to see this too much, but I'm going to tuck this bad boy back into here where we had it yesterday. Yeah, hold on one second. I'm going to make sure. There we go. That's a little bit better. Now we'll put that on top of the charcoals to let it smolder. As you can hear, our alarm's going off because our temperature dropped below what we set it at for our low point. Now Kim's going to lift this back up, and as she does, if you'll notice, we've got our temperature gauge over here off to the side, put it on the grate so we can get the temperature read. We have got our wood on top of the coal smoldering. You do not need to soak it in water. That is a myth. They make boats out of wood because the wood does not soak the water in all the way, as you might assume that it does. It's going to go a very, very small amount, and besides, because we are controlling the flow of oxygen and keeping oxygen levels low, that wood will not combust anyway. It's physics or chemistry, I guess. It's just going to smolder and give us this nice smoke. Now, this smoke that we see coming out today is a little bit wider than I would like. It's not bad, but we're looking for even a thinner, more blue smoke. But this will work. This will be okay. It's still sweet. And as we get that chunk of wood smoldering, it should get even better. I also was smarter today and remembered to put my water pan in. You always want to cook with a water pan when you're doing, especially when you're doing long cooks like pulled pork or brisket. We've got a water pan in there. all that is just whatever pan you have laying around. A little pot, you could use a bowl, fill it with water, put it underneath the grill grate to help keep the air moist and create a humid environment. All right, Kim's gonna lift this up. I'm gonna stop jabbering. I'm gonna put this on right here on the grill grate. We're gonna put it kind of as far away as we can from the fire over there, because we don't want this side burning, and we also don't want this side touching. So Kim's gonna put that right back down. I'm gonna take my gloves off. And then we're going to lift this back up. And what I need to do is feed this through the hole. Now you could leave this here, but if you notice, that leaves this grill open. So what that's doing is creating leaks. And leaks are your enemy. Can't pull that for me. Look at that. This is so much easier when you have an extra set of hands. Leaks are your enemy when it comes to barbecue. Let's pull this all the way through. You know what? Here, lift that just a second. We are going to lift it up a little higher for me. Thank you, sir. We're gonna put this in a little bit higher. You know what? I'm actually gonna redo this because this is not gonna close all the way. So we're gonna find that middle point again. I'm gonna use my fingers.
Let's talk. Arms tired.
Oh, sorry. We're gonna go on the side right here. My fingers tell me that's in the middle. We can set that back down.
Thank you.
Thank you, doting wife. Now where we set this down matters. We want these holes, I forgot to mention this yesterday, we want the vents over the meat. And the reason for that is because these vents are sucking the smoke out, sucking all the air out, and that smoke is gonna go the direction of the vents. And if the vents are over the meat, it's gonna take that smoke and bathe, or since it's Sunday, baptize your meat in that sweet, delicious smoke. And so we want those vents right over that smoke. We're gonna plug this in. My hands are all super gross now because I was dumb and didn't think about where that thermometer was going. All right, did that go in? If you want to come take a look at this, camera assistant extraordinaire. Now we've got two temperatures going. This is the temperature of our grill grate, the internal temperature of our grill essentially. And it's obviously jumped way down, but it's gonna climb back up really fast because we just closed the top. Down here is our meat temperature. We are gonna be looking for a temperature of 203 degrees. I know it sounds pretty specific, but that's where we're heading for today. What you're doing with pulled pork is you are cooking it past the temperature of doneness. So the temperature of doneness for pork, according to the FDA, is 145 degrees. So you could cook this to 145 degrees and eat it, but you could not pull it apart. To be able to pull the meat apart, you've got to break down those protein bonds and the connective tissue much, much further, which is why we take it way past the point of doneness, just like you would with pot roast, up to 203 degrees. But as we talked about before, you can throw it up on me. My hands are gross. As we talked about before, when we are cooking something like pulled pork or brisket, it's going to hit that stall where the temperature stops rising, sometimes for hours on end. Now you could do this without wrapping the pulled pork. It's just going to add 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours to your cook time. I don't have that kind of time. Well, okay, right now I have that kind of time. We all have that kind of time, but I would rather be watching reruns of literally anything than just standing at my grill and wasting charcoal. So what we're gonna do is wrap in aluminum foil. There is a little bit of a technique to that. We're gonna talk about that, but wrapping aluminum foil keeps the heat and the moisture in a really confined space and pushes it right back down into the meat, which pushes us through the stall and is gonna save us a lot of time. So yeah, but that's not going to come till about 160, 170 degrees. There's not a magic temperature there. It's a matter of watching the smoker. I'm sorry, watching your thermometer. And that's why you have to have a thermometer to do this. Now again, you could just use a digital thermometer, but you're going to have to be checking this pretty regularly with that. The beauty of having this probe set up is that I've got a remote sensor inside that tells me the temperature, and I can keep an eye on it. So I can see, okay, it's at 160. I need to start keeping an eye on it. At 160, it may climb to 165 pretty consistently, but then start taking, instead of 10 minutes to go up a degree, maybe it takes 20, and then 30, and then 40, and that's when you know you've hit your stall. At that point, it's time to wrap. And if you wrap then, you're going to push through and you're going to cook a lot faster. But again, that's it. What did I say, 160, and we're at 43 degrees. So we're looking realistically at about 3 or 4 hours from now before we even get to that temperature. So we're gonna leave this as it is. Our temperature is climbing back up. Again, I wanna hit about 250, maybe even 275, because pulled pork can take it. And if we can save time, that means we can save resources, and that's a good thing. So yeah, so we're gonna leave that on there. We've got a pulled pork. We just a summary of what we did. We've got a bone-in 4 or 5 pound pork butt, which again comes from the shoulder, not the butt, or the backside of the pig. It's bone-in, so we didn't tie it, although you could. If it's boneless, you want to get butcher's twine, and you definitely want to tie it like you would a roast, so it stays together on the smoker. We layered flavors in the form of Chris Lilly's pork injection, which again you should Google, but if you use, make sure you cut it at least in half, because it's designed in the Epicurious recipe for 16 pounds, and that's a whole shoulder. This is just part of a shoulder. Then we salted the outside because we didn't salt it the night before, but if you really want to tenderize your meat, salt before, half a teaspoon per pound. But if you do that, you want to leave the salt out of the injection. And again, if you salt separately like I do, you need to find a salt-free rub, because that was another layer of flavor, was my rub. If you want to see the ingredients of my rub, check out the video from yesterday when we were making ribs. I walk through the whole thing and tell you how much the proportions of each. But I keep the salt and the rub separately, so I put the rub on top of that. We made sure that it was nice and tacky, because wet cold meat holds on to smoke better than dry meat that will just let the smoke bathe right over. We are smoking with hickory wood because that's what we have a lot of in Tennessee, and that's what I have on hand. But you can use all sorts of hardwoods. You could use oak. Applewood is a great wood to smoke with. Cherry, peach, guava, pecan. There's all sorts of different fruit. There's all sorts of different hardwoods out there to use. We've got our water pan in there to make sure that the environment in there stays humid and moist, to keep the food moist. We've got our temperature grate at the we've got our temperature read on the grate and in the meat, and now we just sit around for the next 3 or 4 hours, which is kind of true. You do want to keep your eye on your smoker, especially if you don't have one of those cheater electric smokers. I call them cheaters. No, you can still. Okay, here's the truth about pellet smokers and those sawdust packets and all those other things. You can still make good barbecue on those things. You cannot make great barbecue. Now, you may not care about the difference, but it's a matter of science, because that sawdust and those pellets, which is also made of sawdust, combust differently than a solid piece of wood. And what happens in that combustion process is different types of smoke. And to get that beautiful blue sweet smoke that sweetens your meat and doesn't just overpower it with smoke that can become acrid, you have to combust wood. You have to create actual fire. That's why when you go to Texas or somewhere that has a really proud barbecue tradition, they're burning whole logs of wood in a firebox in an indirect heat source, and then bringing the heat and the smoke over. That's the only way to get that legendary magical barbecue. However, don't let that deter you. That is a lot of work. Offset grills are really hard to control, and you need to spend money to get a good one. If you go out to Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart and get one off the rack, so to speak, they tend to be leaky. The metal tends to be thin. It doesn't insulate very well, and you'll end up hating it because you can't control it. But the reality is, not really anybody can control those things unless they're been doing barbecue for 80 years, just because they're not good instruments to work with. You want good tools. And so if you're starting off with barbecue, start off with something like this Weber. It's super simple. But if you've got an electric smoker, those can still make good barbecue. So don't hear me saying that. But don't try to get into the offset stuff, because you need not just a big space to put that kind of thing. You also need to know how it operates, and you need a wood pile, because you've got to feed that thing wood. So you need space for wood. Then you've got to be monitoring that a whole lot more. It's a lot of work. I love them. That's the best barbecue you can make, but it takes a lot of work. And that's the secret to real barbecue, or to really great barbecue, is there's not any corners that you can cut to make good barbecue. If you go to a barbecue restaurant and it's bad, it's because they're cutting corners. Maybe they're using cheaper meat. Maybe they're steaming stuff, God forbid. They're doing all sorts of things to cut corners. Maybe they're using crappy wood. They're not being neurotic. If you want really good barbecue, you got to be neurotic about it. You got to pay attention to your meat. You got to pay attention to your wood. You got to pay attention to the color of the smoke. You got to pay attention to the temperature fluctuations. You got to pay attention to all of that stuff. You got to take notes to learn from your mistakes. That's really the best thing you can do to become a good pitmaster, is to screw up. Because as you screw up, just like anything else in life, you learn from it. And so I've got a journal that I keep, and I write down what cut of meat I'm using, most of the time where I got the meat, how much the meat weighs, And then I start writing down, well, did I salt it the night before? Did I use, this, that, or the other rub? Did I use an injection? What was the temperature like outside? Was it sunny? Was it cloudy? Was it hot? Was it cold? Because all of those factors play in. And then I take notes along the way. Okay, I checked the temperature at this point, and it had only gotten to such and such temperature. And then at the end, I make notes about the finished product. Well, was it dry? Well, how was the bark? What could I have done differently? That way, when I go back to make pulled pork or ribs again, I'm not just starting from scratch saying, okay, what should I do? What should I do with this? I have a baseline to work with and say, okay, I'm not going to do this again. Maybe I'll try this. But you want to have a baseline to work from with barbecue so that you can learn from your mistakes, whether it's with the meat, with the cooking, with the sauce, or with the rub. That's the only way to get better at barbecue. That's the only way to get better at life. And now I need to go watch church because I'm a heathen and schedule barbecue.
One
for
question
church time.
first.
Yeah, questions.
Thomas asks, is butcher paper any better than foil? Does it matter?
Yes. So it doesn't make a dramatic difference, but I definitely am of the Aaron Franklin persuasion. Aaron Franklin is a pitmaster in Texas, and he's the one that started using butcher paper on brisket. I always use butcher paper on brisket because it has it's a permeable layer, meaning that it has some interaction with the environment. And what you're doing there isn't so much allowing smoke to still hit the meat, because he's wrapping that brisket at the point where he doesn't want any more smoke hitting the meat, because you can over smoke the meat. He wraps it in that butcher paper to stop the smoke, but allow the cooking process to continue and allow some of that moisture to get through the butcher paper so that he can hold on to a nice bark. Because when you wrap brisket, really anything, in aluminum foil, it's non-permeable, it's having no interaction with the environment, and it's a sealed off environment, so it's keeping all that moisture in, which is great for pulled pork and even can be good for brisket because it holds the moisture and brisket dries out. But you're going to lose you're not going to lose your bark, but it's not going to be as barky, to use a scientific term, as it would be if you use butcher paper. I have used butcher paper for...
Does it get softer?
It does get softer. That's the word I'm looking for. I needed a doctor to give me the big words. It does get softer, so it's going to soften your bark. Your bark's going to stay a little bit harder if you use butcher paper. I've used butcher paper and aluminum foil with pulled pork. I haven't really noticed too much of a difference. It's more of a difference maker if you were like in a competition. I saw somebody yesterday on TV. We were watching a competition show, and they wrapped their pulled pork in butcher paper and then set it in aluminum foil to catch the juices. I think that's a great idea, and that's kind of what we're going to do a little bit. But what I usually wrap I usually wrap my pork butts in aluminum foil so that it keeps all that moisture in, and then I will wrap brisket in butcher paper because I want the bark really I'm more concerned with bark on brisket than I am with pulled pork, because with brisket you're slicing the meat, and so you get that bark with every bite. With pulled pork, you're mixing it in, and you can, especially if you don't wrap pulled pork, and I've had this problem sometimes with even butcher paper, is if you don't wrap it and try to just pull through, you can create a bark that's inedible. It's really, really hard, and that's just not pleasant, even when you pull apart. So I wrap it in aluminum foil. It softens a little bit, but I still keep my bark, and I keep all the juices so I can mix those in at the end, which makes for much more succulent meat. So that's a good question. Any other questions before I go pray for forgiveness for scheduling barbecue cook-off tutorial on Palm Sunday? I know what today is.
Sampam Day?
Sampam. This is not going well. All right.
It's God.
Yeah, it's God telling me I stop. So anyway, we've gone through everything. Our pork butt is going. Our temperature is rising. Again, you want to keep it as consistent as you can, but with pulled pork, you don't freak out, if it's going up a little bit. Oh, it's our children. I was like, is there a squirrel on our roof? It is our children looking through the window. Don't freak out if the temperature goes up a little bit or starts going down. Try to adjust it, but don't make big adjustments. Make tiny adjustment. Let it go up or recover slowly. Let it go down slowly. It's pulled pork. It can take the beating. So we'll check back in, what did I say, 4-ish hours, which would be, let's see, what time? We got like roughly 10. So let's say 2 o'clock, and that should be about time to wrap. If not, just check my Facebook and I'll update you, because I'll Anyway, it looks like it's time to wrap. If you look at our thermometer, the temperature has gotten up real high up top because I just let it go here at the end since we are about to take the meat off anyway. But that temperature at the bottom is our meat temperature. It's 169. And you're going to wrap somewhere between about 155, 160 to 170 to get rid of the dreaded stall. What is the stall? First of all, let's take these out. Open it up and check out and see how our meat is looking. Ooh, it's a little warm. Let's move these probes. We got a nice pretty piece of pulled pork going, or not pulled pork yet. Right now it's just a pork butt. This has been on here. It's 2 o'clock. We put it on at 10 o'clock, a little bit before 10 o'clock. So it's been on there just at 4 hours. We've been smoking with hickory over charcoal using this slow and sear on my Weber. And it has gotten up to temperature for the stall. The stall is essentially a period of time when your meat kind of stops cooking, or at least it stops rising in temperature. What happens is the meat essentially starts to sweat, and just like with people sweating, it cools off the meat and it slows down the temperature. And we don't want that to happen because the stall can last literally for hours. So we are going to do something called wrapping the meat, and it's as simple as it sounds. We're going to use aluminum foil. My friend Tommy asked earlier if there's a difference between aluminum foil or butcher paper, which is what a lot of people like to use these days for brisket. And the answer is yes, especially for brisket. Butcher paper will let the smoke continue to interact a little bit. It'll keep the meat from or for the bark from getting super soft, because the butcher paper is permeable, so it allows some of that moisture to escape. Aluminum foil obviously does not, but we're not super concerned, or that's not true. We are concerned with the bark. The bark is this dark part right here. It looks like it's burnt, but it's not. It's something called the Maillard reaction. Maillard reaction is what makes your steaks nice and crusty and gives that extra beautiful look and flavor to barbecue. It's the interplay of amino acids and sugars meeting up with the heat and kind of like caramelizing, but it kind of dries it out and gets you that nice, beautiful bark. And it gives you that extra nice flavor that you get on steaks and barbecue. We're not super concerned with having a real hard bark with this. Now, if you leave this unwrapped, you will get a really hard bark, but it can get as tough as jerky and almost be inedible, and we definitely don't want that. So we're going to wrap to push through the stall, because again, we're going to use aluminum foil, because unlike brisket, which we do really want a nice crunchy kind of bark, we're just going to go ahead and toss this in. Now, there is a little bit of technique here, and that technique is twofold. One, let's get this out of the way so that we just have one probe going in. If you remember before, we talked about our probes. We had one probe right over here to measure the temperature grate, and we have one probe in our meat. We're going to leave this probe in so that we know exactly when the meat is done, so we can keep an eye on it and don't have to keep opening up the meat, opening up the aluminum foil wrapper to check on it. Because if we do that, we're going to let moisture escape. The humidity that's been created in there is all going to evaporate, and it's going to dry out the meat. Not completely, but you want to hold on to that as much as you can. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to see if I can't. Nope. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. If you've got some gloves, you probably want to use them there because this is hot. I'm going to grab my wife real quick because there is a little bit of technique. Now, if you've been watching like a barbecue cooking competition show, you'll see, especially when they wrap ribs at this point, they'll put down brown sugar and butter and cola and all kinds of different things. You don't want to do that here. They're trying to maximize flavor into one single bite of barbecue. That's why they're putting all those extra flavorings in there. You could do that here at home, but it's going to be flavor overkill to the point where it's not enjoyable if you had all that stuff going on here. You could add some apple juice here for extra flavor. Not extra flavor, I'm sorry, but extra moisture. It'll give it a little bit of flavor. Apple cider vinegar would do the same. You could put beer in here. You could put some sort of soda. You could put just water to give extra moisture, but I think we're going to be okay without it for the simple reason that there's a lot of fat on this pork anyway, and it's going to give us the moisture we need. I'm going to close this up for just a second. This is not wrapping it. I'm just going to go grab my wife, who's doing the dishes, because she's being very nice, and see if she'll film me real quick. Oh, you guys have any questions while we're hanging out here for just a moment? Hope you heathens went to church online. I did. Jesus is judging you if you didn't. Just film me real quick while I wrap this. Okay. Apparently she's got to get shoes on because she doesn't want her feet to burn. Hi, Munchkin. All right, here we go. You feel me? Turning around.
So bright.
Okay, so like I said, there's a little bit of technique here. The most important thing that we're trying to do is to get this as close as possible. As we said before, using aluminum foil will soften the bark, but we can minimize some of that softness by getting this aluminum foil on here as tightly as possible. That way we're keeping the heat in, but we are not creating a little air pocket for it to create a lot of humidity. This is going to be warm, so if you've got gloves you want to use, like some thick insulated ones, this is not a bad idea for that. I'm using heavy duty aluminum foil because that thin stuff will, what's the word I'm looking for? Will tear on you. I'm going to fold this right here. Actually, you know what? We can get, I'm dumb and didn't do this the right direction, so let's turn this sideways. There we go. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to make a little tear right here very carefully so that I can crimp.
You're just showing them how to troubleshoot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm showing you how to troubleshoot. So I can crimp around this. Oh, got some bones sticking out over there. I'm going to fold this just like you would something that you would fold. I don't know. I don't have an analogy.
Like a roll up for
almost like a burrito.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do here again is to get this as tight as I possibly can so that we can avoid moisture. You're also wanting to avoid, see, I found a little pocket down there. You want to avoid anything escaping, because the point of this is to keep, like we said with that stall, your meat is essentially sweating. And that sweat, that evaporation is cooling off the meat. We want to push that heat and that moisture right back in, right back into this pork butt. To do that, we need this as tight as possible and as sealed as possible. Now, like Kim said, we're going to troubleshoot. Because see, I still have a little bit of spot over here. And I accidentally punctured it over here, but there's no problem, because we got more aluminum foil. So I'm going to get another layer of aluminum foil, which you probably want to do at home anyway. If you notice, this is obviously sitting in an aluminum pan, and that's not by accident. Even with this wrapped up in aluminum foil, you're probably still going to get some juices that are going to drip down. That's why I like to double wrap this. That will help minimize that. But you can still have juices that will still thaw out in your oven, which is where we're going to go to cheat. And so I like to have this for two reasons. One, to keep those juices from falling to the bottom of your oven and causing just a stink and smoke and nastiness. But also we want to keep those juices if we can, because we're going to pour them back onto the meat, especially the ones we capture in here. Like I said, we're going to cheat. And the reason for that is once you cover this thing in aluminum foil, none of anything that's going on over here is going to be interacting with the meat except the heat. You're not getting any more smoke flavor. You're not getting any more grill flavor. You've essentially, by wrapping this in aluminum foil, just like if you wrapped anything else in aluminum foil, you could put it on a grill. You could have, you know, pillows of smoke coming out, but it's not going to get to the meat because this is metal and it's keeping the smoke out. So essentially you've turned your grill into an oven. And at this point, you know, there's some debate. If you want to be a purist, you keep going, you keep adding charcoal, you keep adding wood. But the reality is adding charcoal and wood obviously wastes charcoal and wood because you're not getting any flavor out of that. But it's also a little bit tricky to add charcoal in the middle of a cook. If you need to do that, you want to add lit charcoal, so get that chimney back out, light them somewhere separately and add them. That's going to minimize your smoke. But I think that using metal and lighters and all this other stuff and temperature probes is cheating. I mean, if you want to be a caveman, like Meathead says, you know, you can go dig a hole in your backyard and burn some wood down into charcoal and be a caveman if you want. But I mean, we're already cheating with metal and air conditioning and electricity and all this other stuff, so why not lean into it by using your oven? And so what I like to do too is that with that is that once it's in the oven, then I can leave the house if I need to. So if like I forgot some ingredient or I want to get an extra side and it's not a pandemic, then you can put this in your oven. You've got the temperature monitored, and we still have another 4 hours before this is going to be done, so you've got some free time on your hands. I'm going to close this because that's getting hot. We're going to close these vents, and that will smother out the fire. You don't have to pour water on or anything like that. The oxygen will be gone from the chamber and it'll kill it. But anyway, we're going to put this in the oven and hook it back up to the thermostat. Yeah, I need to close that bottom vent too. Do you want to go ahead and Kim's going to, our video camera extraordinaire person, all the way to the left. There you go. We're gonna take this inside and our thermometer because we're gonna still use this. Like I said, wrapping doesn't really do any good if you wrap all of it and leave a big hole in the side. So what we're gonna do is add one more layer. Just to make sure that this doesn't have any more holes in it, just to make sure that we've got this nice and wrapped. I'm gonna go the opposite way with the aluminum foil this time, just to try to help cover up any holes. And again, even with this layer, we wanna make sure it's nice and tight. So get in there, all the crevices, all the bends of the meat, and make sure, see, if you can notice, I've already got juice coming out of that interior one because there was a little bit of a poke through with the bone. That's a technical phrase. And then obviously we've got that hole where the thermometer is. So we wanna do another layer of this just to keep those juices in, keep the heat in, keep the moisture in, get it really, 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 really tight so we can try to preserve as much of that bark as possible. And then we are gonna crimp around.
She wants to know how, Penny wants to know how thick the Reynolds wrap is.
I'm sorry?
How thick the aluminum foil is.
This is just Reynolds wrap, heavy duty aluminum foil. There's like a barbecue version that they sell, or I think it's just marketing. It may be slightly thicker, but this is just your generic Reynolds wrap aluminum foil.
And then Kevin Sandlin says he cheats by putting it in the crock pot after smoking it.
Dear God. Never thought about that, but I think you would definitely kill your bark, would be my guess with that. You've got it, so like, because you wouldn't have the tight environment that you've got with this wrap. Anyway, so we've...
You could wrap it and put it in the...
You could, yeah, you could wrap it. That's a good idea. Put it in crock pot. That's interesting. I never thought about that, Kevin. Thank you for the new idea. Anyway, but if you can see, we've got even these little indentions here. We just want to go through. This is going to be a little warm, so you may want thicker gloves. These are more about keeping my hands clean than our temperature. Go underneath it. Right here where the probe is coming out, we want to crimp that as tight as we can. Make sure that we don't have or minimize what's coming out. Once we feel like we've got everything as tight as it'll possibly go on here, we're going to come toss it in to our aluminum foil, which again, already dripping juices, but no problem, because we can recover those. I've been preheated this oven to 275 degrees. Like we said before, I like to cook pulled pork, either 250 or 275. I want to make sure that we actually eat dinner at a reasonable time, and 275 will kind of guarantee that we do that. I've got that in there. I'm going to put my probe back into the thermometer. It's going to heat back up. You can put this in either one. I just put it back in the top because that's what's fastest. We're sitting at 171 degrees. Our target temperature is 203 degrees. At worst case scenario, this should be done in about 4 hours. But again, like we said earlier, all meat is different. It's all finicky. It all has a mind of its own. You know, some of it's tougher, you know, than others. And so it may cook faster, it may cook slower. I'm going to check in a couple hours. I'll give you guys a heads up when it looks like it's getting close to that 203 degree mark. And then we'll pull it out. I'm going to make a sauce before we do. Not another full barbecue sauce, but East Carolina mop sauce, which East Carolina is, or the Carolinas in general, are famous for whole hog, which means that's when they take the whole hog, cutouts insides, put it on the big chamber, and then smoke the whole thing at once, and then mix up all the different cuts. They use a mop sauce, and it's basically just a spicy vinegar sauce. There's no like ketchup or molasses or sugar in it. There's sugar, I'm sorry, there's not like brown sugar in it. And they will literally use a big bucket and a mop, and that's how they keep the pork moist. But they also will toss it with the pulled pork at the end, which I like to do because you really want to make sure this pork is nice and juicy. Because like turkey, it can be dry, especially if you overcook it. It can really dry out really quickly. And with all barbecue, whether it's this or ribs or brisket, especially brisket, as soon as you cut it, as soon as you slice it, as soon as you start pulling it, it dries out super fast. So we want to add as many juices as we can, preferably the juices that we're going to catch in the aluminum foil, but also this mop sauce will help a little bit too. And it's super easy. It's basically just vinegar, hot sauce, sugar, I think there's some salt and pepper, and that's it. And it's great, adds a little flavor, a little bit of a tang. But that should be in about 3 or 4 hours. Just keep an eye on Facebook, and I'll let you guys know. But yeah, this is cheating, but I don't care. So is using air conditioning and electricity, and we use all those things while we do barbecue. why not make your life easier so you don't have to burn through charcoals, you don't have to tend to grill. This is going to be set and steady, and I can leave the house if you need to. When the pandemic is over, you can do chores, do whatever you need to do because you don't have to worry about tending to fire anymore. So yeah, if there's no more questions, I will. Oh,
Kevin said he didn't lose his bark.
Oh, he didn't? Oh, let's get in. Did you wrap it when you put it into the crock pot, or did you just put it straight into the crock pot?
I think there's a little bit of a delay.
There probably is a delay. I'm gonna guess you didn't wrap it. So I guess the follow-up question would be, did you add any liquid to the crock pot, or was it just you took the pork butt out and put it into the crock pot?
No wrapping.
No wrapping? What about any other liquids? That would be my other question. Because that's a really curious technique, because you're basically doing the same thing.
And you save your oven.
And you save your sides. Oven. That's right. That's a really good idea the more I think about it. I like that idea, Kevin. Because the problem you do have here is that now we're using our oven. And so if you wanted to like bake some...
No liquid.
No liquid? Nice. I'll have to try that sometime. Good tip, Kevin. I mean that sincerely. But what you can do is, if you need to use your oven and this finishes earlier, you can time it to finish earlier, or you're just doing this for the first time and it finishes way earlier. We use a technique called a faux cambro. Cambro is essentially just an insulated box that caterers use to transfer their food from where they cook it to where they're serving it. And you can make one of these at home if you've got one of those big igloo thermoses. It doesn't need to be a Yeti or anything super fancy, but as long as it's one of those big, coolers, the reality is they insulate temperature. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cold, and it can't tell the difference. So what we do is we pour about 3 gallons of hot water into one of those things about 30 minutes beforehand. Close the top, let it steam up in there, get nice and hot and humid. Pour the water out, put a towel in case you need to catch any juices. And then you can put, especially with pulled pork, you can put that into that big cooler, close the lid, and it'll hold for 2, 3, 4 hours. So if you need to go to grandma's house for Thanksgiving, this is a great way to smoke or cook or whatever it is you're doing at home. And this works with any food that you may need to take somewhere. I use it all the time. Me and several friends have started cooking barbecue for Rumania and a homeless ministry at our church. And I smoke brisket here and I smoke pulled pork here. I don't do it at church. So what I do is get this faux cambro. I put it in there sometimes even an hour before I leave. And I take it over to the church, and it'll be 2, maybe even 3 hours between the time that the pulled pork is done cooking and I actually take it out to pull apart, and it's just like it came off the smoker. It's a really awesome trick, super easy to do, and if you've already got a cooler, it won't cost you any money. So anyway, if there's no more questions, we'll come back, like I said, probably at 6 o'clock and make that sauce and show you how pulled pork, how to use meat claws, which aren't just a gimmick. They actually do make your life a whole lot easier to pulling the pork apart. Give you some ideas on what to do with leftover pulled pork, and then I'm going to eat it because I think it's going to be really good. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Kevin, for that great idea of crock pot.
He said he's done it for 20 years and it never fails.
That's awesome. I never thought about that, because every time I hear a crock pot, and the reason I was suspicious at first is it's people just taking crock pot and getting their pork butt, putting it in there and dumping barbecue sauce on it, which is absolutely not barbecue. But the way you're doing it is basically what I'm doing, and I think that's a really creative solution. I like that, and if I ever buy a crock pot, I will definitely be trying it. Okay, welcome back. Since we last saw you guys, I don't mean to brag, but we got a swimming pool installed. Well, not so much a swimming pool as our 4-year-old daughter filled up a giant plastic tub full of water and dumped it on the carpet upstairs. And so now there's standing water. But we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're going to call it a swimming pool and make the best of this situation. Also discovered that her sister wrote, "I hate you, Ellie," on Ellie's wall. So great times in the Hunt household. We've been working on pulled pork today. We started off this morning. We did stuff with a pork butt. We injected it with Chris Lilly's pork injection, which you can Google, find the recipe too. Epicurious has it on their website. It's a great injection, gives some flavor and some savoriness to the inside of the pork that may not reach it otherwise. We salted our pork because we didn't do it the night before. We put a rub that we made yesterday, so you can check out that video if you want to get the recipe for my rub. And then we smoked it for 4 hours today over some hickory and charcoal on my Weber. Until it got to about 165, and then we wrapped it in aluminum foil, 2 layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil, and put an aluminum pan, and we cheated, and we stuck it in the oven at 275, And miracle of all miracles, that cheating paid off. And our pork was done at 4 o'clock. So it's been sitting in a faux Cranbro for 2.5 hours. You may be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, it's been 2.5 hours since the pork is done. It's going to be terrible. It is not. And I'm going to show you how we held it and kept it warm and nice and succulent and everything you want out of pulled pork. You don't like the word succulent. Juicy? How's juicy? There's not really a good word to describe the moisture that you want in your pulled pork. But it's going to be nice and fresh and warm and hot. And I'm going to show you how I did that. But before we start pulling the pork, we're going to make an East Carolina mop sauce. This is something that pitmasters like to use to keep their whole hog nice and moist in East Carolina. And we're not doing whole hog, but this is really good vinegar-based sauce that you can put on pulled pork either when you're cooking it or like a whole hog, or when you pull it like we're going to do and toss it with some sauce, or just put it on your sandwich. What's great about a vinegar sauce and pulled pork is that if you use the sauce that we made yesterday, we've got the recipe and cooking instructions in the last video, but that sauce is a traditional thick barbecue sauce, and it's going to sit on top of the meat. The great thing about these vinegar sauces is they penetrate down into the meat, and so you get that flavor all through instead of just on top. I'll even use a combination sometimes, and I'll pour some vinegar sauce on and then top it out with some barbecue sauce as well. But I really like this sauce. My wife really likes it. This vinegar sauce is not my own creation. This comes from AmazingRibs.com, which is the best source for all things barbecue on the internet. If you want to learn about barbecue, if you want to get recipes, if you need recommendations for smokers, grills, accessories, anything in between, this video is not sponsored by them, but it is my favorite site, and I highly, highly recommend it. Anyway, this is Meathead's vinegar sauce. We're going to cut the recipe in half because we don't need that much. We're going to start off with, turn this around so I can actually see, 3/4 of just standard white vinegar. Nothing special about this vinegar except that there's not enough in that bottle. But with some movie magic, we came prepared. This is just your standard white vinegar, like I said. I like Heinz, but I don't think that you notice a huge difference in quality of white vinegar. To the white vinegar, we are going to add some more vinegar in the form of hot sauce. I like Frank's. Maybe you like Texas Pete's, but you are free to use whatever the good Lord leads you to use. This is adding a little bit of vinegar because that's mostly what hot sauce is, but it's going to give us a little kick and a little bit of flavor as well. We're going to add 1/2 teaspoon to our concoction. Then we're going to add some sugar. You can use any kind of sugar you want. We're going to use white sugar because that's what I got. And we are going to do...
That's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to use a tablespoon of white sugar. This is a 1/2 tablespoon, which is why it looks like I am doing 2 tablespoons, but that's just 1. Then we're going to use kosher salt. We're going to use 1/2 teaspoon. I got an accent. 1/2 tablespoon, rather, of kosher salt. Yep, that's correct. Then we're going to use 1 teaspoon. Let's find our teaspoon. Hi, it's outside. Fun. How's the weather? Is it nice? It's good. Great. Sorry, my daughter's outside playing. We're going to use 1 teaspoon of crushed red peppers and 1 teaspoon of black pepper. This again is our medium grind pepper, 16 mesh if you're getting fairly fancy. We're going to mix that in there. Stir all of this together. Good, nice and mixed up. You can use a whisk if you want, or you can just use the tablespoon so you don't make things any more messy.
Can you use Himalayan pink salt? That's all they have right now.
Sure. I would double check the substitution ratios just because it may be a little bit different. Because I don't know how big if you're grinding that salt yourself or if it's already ground into big kernels. But yeah, any kind of salt works. You can use table salt. Just again, check the ratios because the size of the salt does matter. You don't want it to be too salty. Like I said, you can use any kind of sugar for this. You can use any kind of hot sauce for this. You could technically use apple cider vinegar, but it would definitely taste different.
Penny was asking if the kids eat this because of the heat.
The kids love the pulled pork, but they do. I usually leave this sauce off. Well, a little bit. I'll do a little bit of it because it does get a little bit of flavor, and it doesn't really bring a whole lot of heat. If you want to feel the heat with it, you would want to put it directly on your sandwich. When you toss the meat in it, it's very much of a background note. But guess what? We're done. Super, super easy sauce. You don't need to cook it. You don't need to reduce it. Ideally, you would want to let it sit and kind of marinate for a little while. You having trouble over there, darling?
Yeah, my boot won't come out.
Your boot won't come off? Do you think you can do it quietly? Yeah. Anyway, you'd want to let this sit a little bit. That way those dried out red pepper flakes and even the black pepper will have some time to release their oils and flavor that vinegar a little bit. And just let them all marry together and have a good dance and get you a little more flavor than just the vinegar. But that's okay because we're doing a video and we're going to make this immediately. Also, my kids are hungry and my wife is hungry and I'm hungry, so we're going to eat. So as I said, our pulled pork was done at 4 o'clock, which was 2.5 hours ago, 2 hours earlier than I expected to be made. But that's okay because we have something called the faux Cambro. This is another meathead invention that comes from AmazingRibs.com. All this is a cheap Igloo cooler. I have a big fancier one. It's also Igloo. I don't own a Yeti because that's crazy money for a cooler. And I don't really have that much of a need for them. But it's, all cooler does is insulate temperature. Coolers are dumb. They don't know whether or not they're insulating hot. They don't know whether they're insulating hot or cold. We normally use these things to insulate cold things. We put a lot of ice in there to keep our drinks and our food cold when we're going on picnics, but it works the other direction as well, which is really great for when you're making barbecue or when you're catering, making food, taking it to grandma's house, doing whatever, and you get done early and want to take it over there. This thing is great for that. Super easy. All I did was get this thing out, cleaned it out, make sure it didn't have any dead bugs or rats. And then I poured about 3 gallons of hot water in here. Actually guesstimated on that, to use some technical language. Just turn my sink on as hot as it would go, pour the water in till it felt like about 3 gallons. Close the top, let it sit for 30 minutes. That's going to bring some heat to your cooler, and it's also going to get some nice humidity, so it keeps things a little moist. Then if you're still wet, you can put, or if you've got meat that's not in an aluminum foil pan, you want to put a towel down there just so it soaks up any juices. And then all we did was toss this in there, and that's it. It's not magic, but it's some pretty cool science that we can take advantage of to help ourselves out when our food gets cooked a little sooner. Let's check out the finished product. So if you remember, we cheated. After we wrapped the pulled pork in aluminum foil, we decided to move it into the oven because there was nothing to be gained other than pride from leaving this on the smoker, and I don't really have a lot of pride, so I like to cheat and make my life easier, and so we put this in the oven, 275 to finish it off. When we wrapped it, we did double aluminum foil, and we did this as tight as possible. Purpose of this is to push through the stall. The stall is when the meat starts to sweat, the water starts to evaporate, and it essentially cools off the meat, just like if you and I sweat when we exercise, as if I ever exercised. If I did exercise, it would cool me off, or I would get a heart attack, more likely. But it would cool me off, and the meat's getting cooled off. So what we do with the wrap is we push that heat, push that moisture back into the meat, and it pushes through the stall. But we have to do that super, super tight so that we can try to maintain our bark because it's going to get a little soft. We left our probe in here. We crimped it at the end so we could try to keep everything together. But if you look, juice is still seeped out. Even though this is wrapped in double layers of aluminum foil, where there's will, there's a way to make a mess. And so, again, I love these aluminum pans for prep, and I love them for this purpose specifically because they help keep in the juices. Let's take out our temperature probe. And let's unwrap and see what we've got. Hopefully it's going to be pretty. And if it's not, then it won't make the Instagram. But that's okay. So we're going to be real careful because we want to hold on to all these juices that you see in here. We don't want to just toss those. Those juices are flavor, and we work hard for those flavors. So we want to keep those flavors, which is why we're keeping all of this in this pan. Squeeze them out, shake them out a little bit. That is really, really good flavor. That's mostly rendered fat. Fat is flavor. Now let's see the finished product. Hey, there we go. As you can tell, the aluminum foil has made that bark a little softer than it would be if you just left this out. But if you just left this out, it would take forever to cook. And I don't have to, well, I guess right now we all have forever, but I don't want to spend that time. So we wrapped it, we pushed through the stall, and we finished this pork nut, which originally the cold weight, uncooked raw weight of it was about, I think 4.5, 5 pounds in 6 hours. That's not too bad. Here's the main test of this thing, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself. This is always the fun part. We've got this bone, the shoulder bone that's in here. This is part of the shoulder, even though it's called a butt, it's part of the front shoulder. And if we've done this right, this should pull out nice and neat and clean. Let's see. Ooh, this is hot. Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, that's going on Instagram. Look at that. all the protein bonds and collagen is rendered and fat's rendered, and this thing came out nice and smooth. Now, you have a couple of options here. You can take your sweet time and you can pull this apart with your fingers, and they will probably burn. You could also take 2 forks, and you could pull this apart with 2 forks, which would go faster, be less burning. But you could also go to Target or Amazon and get these things. They're called bear claws. They look super fun. And they look really gimmicky, but they're not. They're really awesome for just completely shredding this pulled pork. If you did this by hand, it would probably take you a good 20, 30 minutes. With this, we're going to do it in about 5. All you do is dig in there and act like you're an animal, and you go at it. Now, you want to pay attention as you do this, because you're going to get some funky things in there that you probably just want to toss, or at least I want to toss. This is coming apart nice and neat. But there's going to be some fat pockets, some gelatinous things in there that nobody's going to want to eat. I'm not going to want to eat. You're not going to want to eat. And so if you come across those, don't be afraid to just toss that, because they're yucky and gross. I'm not seeing any so far, because again, every single shoulder you get, even though they're supposed to be the same, are all going to be a little bit different. And look at this. Some of this is even, I'll be honest, has overcooked right here. This is a little dry. But again, you're going to save yourself if you run into this problem like we have right here with some of the meat that didn't cook quite evenly, that's a little dry. We're going to reconstitute the muscle, the flavor, the moisture that we're looking for, because we were smart and we saved all of these juices. So we've got part of this that cooked really, really well and is nice and still and juicy and tender. But because we're going to mix this up, no one is going to be the wiser. No one is ever going to know about that little pocket of dry meat. All they're going to have is sweet, juicy pulled pork, because we're going to shred this together. We're going to toss it in the juices, its own juices. And then we are going to toss a little bit of that mop sauce that we had in there as well. Because again, barbecue is all about, like really any cooking, is, see here? This is just a kind of a fatty, weird, gelatinous, gooey thing. We're just going to toss that in the sink because we don't want that. But you want to shred it. You want to get all of this dark and white meat mixed up. You want some bark in there. That way everybody gets to taste a little bit different meats at the same time. Almost done. Like I said, you can pick up these claws from Target now. You can get them off Amazon. I bet you can probably get them off Walmart. Look, so here's some more fatty yuckiness that just didn't render. You can get, I'm sure, Academy Sports. I'm pretty sure Lowe's, Home Depot sell them as well. They're super easy to find now. But if you make pulled pork, even if you're just making pulled pork in your crock pot, this is going to be a lot easier to shred than if you just use your fork or your fingers. You're just about done. Any questions? You'll see I've got my latex gloves on again. They serve a couple purposes. They give me a little bit of momentary protection from the super hot meat, not a lot. But I wear them mostly because I think they make me look cool, because other pitmasters use them. But really I use them to keep my hands clean, so that the cleanup at the end is easier, especially when you're cleaning the grill and you get all of the greasy funkiness that you're trying to clean up out of there. If you don't use gloves, it just makes it that much harder to wash your hands, even if you're an expert at hand washing these days. Anyway, this is pretty much good to go. If you can, we're gonna pull a couple more of these things. There we go. You wanna just make sure all you're really doing here is trying to tear this into nice, edible, bite-sized pieces. You just don't want big, huge bites, because even though this is super tender and super soft, you wanna make it easier on your guest to eat and make it bite-sized. All right, so that's pretty good. Now what we're gonna do is 2 things. First thing is we're gonna do is toss this in its own sauces, and as I do that, I'm still gonna kind of feel around. If there's any gelatinous stuff in there, we're gonna pull that out, anything funky. Or even if you've got some bark, if you didn't wrap this, or just got a better bark than I did on this particular one, and you find some super hard, gnarly bark that's like tougher than jerky, go ahead and pull that out. Look, see, here's a funky, gross, nasty, gelatinous thing. Nobody wants to eat that. Throw it. But if you do have some gnarly, hard bark, get rid of that too. Not the crunchy, nice stuff that you can bite through, but if you feel something that's like, man, how did I get rocks in my pulled pork? You want to get rid of that. So we've tossed this, and this is good to go. We can eat this right now. But again, I really like building flavors, layer upon layer of flavors. So we're going to toss just a little bit of this Carolina mop sauce that we made, because we made it. Might as well use it. It's going to give us a little bit more flavor and a little bit more moisture. We're just gonna pour it right over the top, and if you make it in a nice measuring cup like this, makes it easy to pour. You can also put this in a squirt bottle for serving, or you can just pour it on like that.
The pepper flakes clogged up the squirt bottle last time.
Oh, good point. My wife reminds us that the pepper flakes did clog up the squirt bottle, so maybe don't do that. But this is going to give an extra little tang. This is going to give a very distinctive kind of North Carolina taste. So if you hate Tar Heels, then maybe you want to avoid this. But I like it quite a bit. I think they do whole hog quite well. So that's it. This is our pulled pork. It's nice and stringy. We've got some good bark. There's some pink from the smoke ring in there. It's nice and shiny and glistening because it's not dried out. We tossed it in its own juices, and we tossed it just now in that sauce. So this should be good to go. Now, what do you do with this other than the obvious and eat it? So we do a couple different things in the Hunt household. We can make sandwiches. You can just get some Martin rolls, you get some sesame rolls, whatever you want. Make your good old-fashioned barbecue sandwich on that. I'm gonna do a taste test because what am I thinking? They're not bad. I'll be honest, it's a little dry. But you know what? Who cares? It's going to be way better than that particular bite was. You know what? I should probably just take another bite to make sure.
Good Lord, we want to eat.
I know.
Okay.
It's pretty good. I'll be honest, it's not my best one, but it's good. And the thing is, you don't need to be a pitmaster to do this. And by this, I mean screw up. No, but you don't need to be a pitmaster to make good pulled pork. It's the super easiest thing out there. If you're getting into barbecue, you should start here. Fresh pulled pork is going to be way better than most of the stuff you get at stores anyway, if you made it in your backyard. We like to do pulled pork sandwiches here. I'll put it on a sandwich. I might sprinkle some more of the vinegar sauce on. Might put some of my other barbecue sauce that we made yesterday on. Totally up to you. And you can eat it just as. Some people put coleslaw. I think that's blasphemy. And that God will judge you in the end times if you put coleslaw on your barbecue. Because we want to taste the meat, not the slaw. Just like the sauce too. If your meat is good, you don't really need sauce. That's the beauty of barbecue. It has its own unique, distinct flavor. You can just put it on a plate and eat it as is. But I'm saying butt a lot, which makes sense because we made some butt. My wife's told me it's time to wrap up. So a couple leftover ideas, because this is way more food than the four of us are going to eat. You could share it with friends and family, or what we're going to do tomorrow is pulled pork tacos. I put this in a Ziploc bag if I'm just going to use it overnight, and you can warm it up, put it in a pouch of aluminum foil in the oven at, what did we say, 375 for about 10-15 minutes with a couple tablespoons of water or more of that vinegar sauce or some of your barbecue sauce or apple cider vinegar, whatever. You're just trying to get some moisture in there, and you're just trying to bring it back up to temperature. And so we're going to put it on pulled pork tacos with some salsa verde, some charred pineapple, cilantro, and some onions. It makes fantastic pulled pork tacos. You could put it on a pizza and do barbecue pulled pork pizza. The sky's the limit with this stuff. Nachos are really great. Or you can put, if you got one of those food savers like I do, put it in a food saver pouch, seal it up, and throw it in your freezer. It'll keep for months. And then if you decide you guys want to have pulled pork one night for dinner, but you don't have time to make one that day, thaw it out the night before. Again, put it in aluminum foil, toss it with some barbecue sauce, whether that be a thicker one or a vinegar one, or just toss it with some water to get some moisture. 375 in the oven for about 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. Just open it up, and when it's steaming, it's done. But whatever you do not microwave it for whatever reason, and I don't know the science behind it, but microwave just destroys barbecue, particularly pulled pork, ends up tasting funky and weird. Anyway, that's my show. Thank you guys for coming, hanging out today and yesterday. Maybe we'll do some more of these in the future, if there is a future. Thank you, darling. Especially to my wife.
Roller's been doing it in his sous vide to reheat it. Yeah.
That's a good idea too. Not all of us are that fancy, Roller. No, I would love a sous vide. Those are super cool. That's a whole other level of barbecue that I have not tried yet. But a lot of people are getting really into it. Some pretty cool stuff. Do you have more questions?
No, he was reheating it that way.
Oh, reheating. Yeah. Reheating that way is awesome too. I was thinking reheating, or some people actually cook their barbecue in sous vide and smoke it. It's crazy science stuff that I'm not ready for. But thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you missed this, watch the replay. Ask me questions. I will try to get those there. I promise I'm not sweating because I have the coronavirus. It's just because I'm old and fat and out of shape. Yeah, thank you guys. I'm going to enjoy this pulled pork, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Wash your hands, keep safe distancing, and we'll see you on the other side of the apocalypse.